The darkness inside the vault wasn't just an absence of light, it was a physical weight, pressing against Dax's temples with the humidity of trapped, centuries-old air. He slid down a slope of pulverized drywall and twisted conduit, his boots crunching loudly in the confined space. He froze at the bottom, holding his breath, waiting for the echo to die. Silence answered him. "Right," Dax whispered, tapping the side of his goggles. The night vision flaring was patchy, washing the room in a grainy, nauseating green static. "Nobody home, just you and me, sweetness." He raised his left wrist, sweeping the blocky scanner across the gloom. The needle on the analog gauge twitched lazily, lacking the conviction of a hard lock. He frowned. The scanner, a gadget he'd cobbled together from a stolen surveyor drone and a broken toaster, was moody on the best of days. "Come on," he coaxed, shaking his wrist. "Don't make me percussive maintenance you. Show me the goods." The needle jumped, a sharp, distinct spike. Dax grinned, the expression hidden by the gloom. He followed the signal, stepping over the skeletal remains of office chairs and collapsing desks. The vault had clearly been an administrative hub for Aegis extractive systems back before the collapse. The walls were lined with dead terminals, their screens cracked or salvaged long ago. But the signal wasn't coming from the workstations. It was pulling him toward the back wall, behind a rusted partition that had partially melted into slag. He squeezed through the gap, the jagged metal snagging on his leather jacket. Behind the partition lay a server rack, stripped bare except for one unit near the floor. It was encased in ceramic plating, untouched by the oxidation that had eaten the rest of the room. "Well, hello," Dax murmured, crouching. He ran a gloved hand over the smooth surface. "You're a long way from corporate, aren't you?" The scanner screamed a low warning, high energy density. Dax pulled a heavy pry bar from his belt. This wasn't just scrap. This was a sealed logic core, likely possessing a backup battery that hadn't discharged. In Rustwater Bend, a functioning Aegis battery could barter for a week's worth of antibiotics or a crate of protein fungus. It was a king's ransom. He wedged the flat edge of the bar into the seam of the casing. "Come on, work with me here," he grunted, leaning his weight into the lever. "I promise I'll trade you to someone nice, maybe a water pump mechanic. You'd like that. Steady work." The seam groaned, a high-pitched screech of metal shearing against corrupted locks. Dax grit his teeth, sweat stinging his eyes beneath the goggles. With a final, agonizing crump, the plating gave way. Inside sat a cylinder the size of a human forearm, pulsing with a faint, rhythmic blue light. A quantum-stabilized power cell. Dax stared at it for a second, stunned. This wasn't just a week's worth of food. This was enough power to run the Ben's filtration generators for a month. This was life. "Jackpot," he breathed. He reached in, disengaging the magnetic clamps with trembling fingers. The cell was heavy, dense with potential energy. He shoved it into his reinforced canvas satchel, feeling the reassuring drag of it against his hip. Thoom. The sound didn't come from the room. It came through the floor, vibrating up through the soles of his boots and rattling the teeth in his skull. Dax went rigid. The jubilation evaporated, replaced instantly with a cold, hollow dread in his gut. That wasn't a settling foundation. That was a rhythmic impact. Heavy. Industrial. Thoom. Dust trickled from the ceiling, dusting his shoulders in gray powder. "No," Dax hissed, "not this close." He scrambled back through the melted partition, ignoring the scrape of metal against his jacket. He needed to get to the surface. If a harvester was roaming the shards, being underground was a death sentence. They sensed density, they sensed material. And right now the entire building above him was just raw ore waiting to be processed. He clawed his way up the debris slope, his boots slipping on the loose shale. The entrance hole was a jagged mouth of gray light above him. He hooked his fingers over the edge and hauled himself up, spilling out onto the glass-strewn pavement of the surface. The sun had finished its retreat behind the haze, leaving the world in a twilight bruise of purple and rust-red. The wind had picked up, whistling through the fluted ruins of the skyscrapers, but the whistling was drowned out by the grinding of gears. 50 meters away, emerging from the heat haze like a demon birthed from the rust itself, was a terrasheer. It was mountainous, a hulking carapace of oxidized iron and scarred plasteel, moving on disjointed spider-like treads that crushed the fused glass into powder. Its primary arm, a massive oscillating saw fueled by plasma injectors, hung low near the ground, twitching with the erratic spasms of corrupted coating. The machine had no face, only a cluster of sensory arrays that glowed with a dull, malevolent amber light. It wasn't looking for him, it was looking for anything. The terrasheer pivoted, its massive chassis groaning. The sensory array swiveled, sweeping over the rubble. It paused, focusing on the coordinates of the data vault he had just exited. The machine let out a sound like a dying wail, a blast of static compressed into a roar. It surged forward. Dax didn't wait. He bolted to the right, staying low, using the jagged spine of a fallen wall for cover. He moved with desperate silence, placing his feet carefully to avoid the betraying crunch of glass, but speed was the only currency that mattered now. Behind him, the world exploded. The terrasheer's saw spun to life, a screaming blur of white-hot energy. It tore into the data vault's entrance, slicing through concrete and steel as if they were wet paper. The ground shuddered violently, nearly knocking Dax off his feet. He skidded around a corner, breathing hard, his lungs burning with the metallic dust. He was in a narrow alley formed by two residential towers in collapse. It was a choke point. If the machine turned, he was dead. He looked up. 6 meters above, a rusted fire escape dangled precariously from the skeleton of a building. Dax grabbed the magnetic grapple at his hip. He uncoiled the wire, his hands shaking. "Don't you dare miss," he whispered, a frantic prayer to the saints of salvage. He spun the hook once and threw it. The magnet clanked against the iron grating, locking on with a solid thud. Dax tested the line instantly, trusting his weight to the braided wire. He hauled himself up hand over hand, his boots scrabbling against the smooth, glass-slick wall of the tower. Below, the alley entrance darkened. The terrasheer had finished with the vault. It had detected the anomaly, the moving pocket of dense energy. It squeezed its massive bulk into the alley, tearing the walls apart as it pushed forward. Sparks cascaded like waterfalls from its scraping shoulders. Dax vaulted over the railing of the fire escape, just as the machine's sensory eye swept the ground where he had been standing seconds ago. He collapsed onto the grating, pressing himself flat, pulling his satchel under his chest to shield the power cell's signature. The machine paused below him. The heat radiating from its engine block was intense, smelling of ozone and burnt oil. The oscillating saw spun down, whirring menacingly. Dax squeezed his eyes shut. He whistled the first 3 notes of a desert lullaby inside his head over and over, forcing his breathing to slow. "I am just dust. I am just rust and glass." The harvester waited, its logic processors churning through millions of obsolete lines of code. Then, with a shuddering grind, it reversed. It had lost the immediate signal, or perhaps a larger deposit of metal in the neighboring sector had caught its attention. It backed out of the alley, the sound of crushing masonry receding into the distance. Dax lay there for a long time, listening to the wind reclaim the ruins. His sweat was turning cold in the dropping temperature of the Ironsides night. Slowly, gingerly, he rolled onto his back. He patted the satchel. "Close," he whispered to the sky. "Too close." But he was alive, and tonight, Rustwater Bend would have lights. He sat up, checking the horizon. The way back was treacherous in the dark, but the track hounds would be prowling soon, and they were faster than the lumbering sheer. He had to move. Dax unhooked his grapple, coiled the wire, and stood up. He adjusted his goggles, giving the retreating dust cloud of the harvester a sharp salute. "Thanks for the workout, ugly," he muttered. He He turned toward the distant, flickering safety of the anti-static poles of Rustwater and began the long run home. The razor-edged labyrinth of the glass shards finally spat him out, giving way to the sprawling expanse of the Rust Desert. It was a vast, bleeding sea of oxidized red grit that seemed determined to swallow sound and hope in equal measure. The air tasted metallic here, like sucking on a penny, thick with the scent of ancient iron decay. Dax kept his head down, his chin tucked into the collar of his patched bomber jacket, goggles pulled tight against the rising wind that howled like a dying engine. Every step was a desperate calculation, a gamble played against the ground itself. Beneath the shifting top layer of sand lay treacherous veins of fused silica, jagged traps hidden by time that could slice through the soles of cheap leather like a vibroblade through butter. He flinched as something crunched ominously under his left heel, shooting a spike of panic up his calf. He couldn't afford to bleed out here, miles from aid, and he definitely couldn't afford new boots. The heavy canvas satchel bumped violently against his hip, unnervingly warm against his flank. It burned with a feverish intensity that permeated his jacket and seared his skin. It wasn't just residual heat from the merciless wasteland sun. The component he liberated, a perfect sphere of seamless singing metal, thrummed with a low-frequency pulse. The vibration traveled up his spine, rattling his teeth and settling deep in the marrow of his bones. It felt alien, wrong. It felt less like cold machinery and more like a frantic biological heartbeat. Paranoia prickled at the back of his neck, the sensation of invisible crosshairs itching between his shoulder blades. If this thing was putting out energy signatures that felt like ore, he was walking bliss through a harvester's dinner plate. "Quit wiggling, will you?" he muttered to the bag, patting the canvas with a gloved hand stained with grease and soot. The canister buzzed against his palm like an irritated hornet. "I am not charging you extra for the ride, but don't push your luck." He waited for an answer that obviously wasn't coming, then forced a sharp exhale through his teeth. He started to whistle a fragmented, jagged desert tune, something upbeat to drown out the silence, though the notes came out shaky, betraying the tremble in his lungs. Just ahead, the skyline of Rustwater Bend cut a jagged, desperate silhouette against the bruising purple dusk. To a stranger, the settlement looked like an ugly scab on the horizon, a chaotic jumble of sheet metal and scrap welding built atop the skeletal, rusting remains of the ancient filtration plant. To Dax, it looked like another day of life. The only beauty in the grim vista lay in the faint, nauseating hum radiating from the perimeter, the anti-static poles. He could feel the field before he heard it, a greasy static charge that made the hair on his arms stand up and filled his mouth with the taste of ozone. Those jagged spears of copper and coil were the only divine intervention stopping the harvesters, from the lowly drill serpents to the nightmarish Forge Sovereign KX itself, from rolling in and grinding the town and everyone in it into mulch. Dax picked up the pace, ignoring the burning ache in his calves and the dry rasps of his own breathing. His stamina was flagging, drained by the heat of the sphere and the stress of the open ground. The shadow of the massive gates loomed over him, smelling of recycled oil, old smoke and human sweat. He let his shoulders drop, the tension bleeding out just enough to keep him upright. He was home. The sentries posted at the heavy corrugated gates offered Dax the barest acknowledgement as he slipped through the gap, just a curt nod from eyes shadowed by the brims of scavenged helmets. It wasn't much, but it was enough. In a colony this small, faces were currency, and anonymity was extinct. The guards knew the gait of every single soul that called Rustwater Bend home. It was a terrifyingly short list. There were barely 50 humans left alive on the surface of Ironspine, 50 beating hearts clinging to the ribs of a world that Aegis extractive systems had chewed up, swallowed whole, and spat out centuries ago. Dax felt the weight of that number every time he looked at the skyline. They were merely dust mites burrowing into a carcass forgotten by a galaxy that stripped the planet of every ounce of ore worth shipping across the stars. He navigated the labyrinth of shanties, the ground crunching under his boots, a mixture of blown sand and metal shavings that coated everything in a fine, abrasive film. Nima was waiting for him, hovering near the entrance of their dwelling, like a nervous ghost. She stood framed by the flickering amber light of a dying filament bulb. Her mechanic's jumpsuit streaked with fresh grease, her copper braid was fraying with the humidity of the evening, but her pale, goggle-stained eyes were sharp, tracking his approach with a mixture of palpable relief and simmering irritation. "You cut it close, Dax, too close," she murmured, her voice tight with the anxiety she usually reserved for delicate circuit repairs. She crossed her arms, the movement releasing a faint scent of hydraulic fluid and ozone. "The sun dipped below the ridges an hour ago. You know the Harvester logic cores switch to hunter-killer algorithms after twilight. The shadows make them bolder." Dax waved a hand dismissively, though his fingers trembled slightly from the adrenaline crash. "Save the lecture, Danny Nima. I didn't get chewed on, did I?" He offered a tired, crooked grin, wiping the grit from his freckled forehead. "Besides, the risk was worth it. I didn't just find copper scraps today. I found a genuine motherlode." He didn't wait for her rebuttal. He pushed past her, placing the canister in her hands, into the cramped sanctuary of their two-bedroom unit. It was little more than a metal box vibrating subtly with the hum of the filtration plant below, but it was theirs. He let his legs finally give out, collapsing on the couch. The furniture groaned in protest, the springs shot and the upholstery peeling away to reveal yellowed foam. But to Dax's aching bones, that crumbling seat felt like a throne. He closed his eyes, letting the red dust of the desert finally settle around him. Dax drifted out of sleep, pulled toward consciousness not by the usual rhythmic rattle of the rustwater ventilation systems, but by a sound that made his teeth ache. It was a high-pitched buzzing, a steady electric thrum that vibrated through the floorboards and into the frame of his cot. It didn't sound like the wheezing cough of their half-broken food processor trying to churn out breakfast sludge. It sounded like pure, contained energy. He cracked one eye open. The room smelled of ozone and hot copper, deeper and sharper than the usual metallic tang of the town. Nima was hunched over her workbench, her silhouette framed against the glow of her monitors. Cables snaked out from her terminal, biting into the metallic surface of the cylinder Dax had dragged back from the wastes yesterday. She was running tests, dozens of them, judging by the frenetic cascade of data scrolling across her screens. Her fingers danced over the keypad, breathless and rapid. Dax pushed himself up, the old springs of the mattress squealing in protest. He rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the grit of desert sand that never quite washed off, and scratched at a healing welding burn on his neck. His throat felt like he'd swallowed a handful of dust. "What time is it?" he croaked, his voice thick with sleep. Nima didn't turn around. She was completely absorbed, her pale eyes reflecting the waterfall of green and amber code. She seemed to only half hear his words, her mind thousands of miles away within the digital labyrinth. This is way beyond anything I have ever seen," she whispered. The sheer reverence in her voice cut through Dax's grogginess. "It's beyond the manuals, beyond the salvage logs." Dax swung his legs out of bed, shivering slightly as his bare feet hit the cold concrete. He blinked, trying to focus on the object on the desk. "What are you talking about, Nima?" Finally, the girl spun her chair around to face him. Her copper braid whipped over her shoulder, and her grease-streaked face was alight with a manic, terrifying curiosity. "The cylinder you found," she said, tapping a schematic on her screen. "I've been analyzing the energy resonance. It isn't a simple power core. It's not just fuel." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "I believe it is a memory bank of some kind, a massive one." Dax frowned, reaching for his goggles where they hung on the bedpost. If all my readings are correct, Nima continued, this is a data drive for some kind of android, a central processing unit. A cold knot of anxiety tightened in Dax's stomach. He looked at the buzzing metal tube with new suspicion. An android? You mean like one of the harvesters? The thought of those massive, mindless hulks tearing through our room made his pulse jump. No, Nima shook her head fiercely, her fingers twitching as if she wanted to touch the device again. Harvesters are crude. They're brute force and rusty logic charts. This is elegant. It's much more advanced than that. It's an uncorrupted program. Dax sighed, the weight of their reality crashing down on Nima's fantasy. He remembered their empty cupboards. Nima, listen to me. We are not scientists. We're starving. We need rations, proper ones, not paste. We need clean water that doesn't taste like iodine. He gestured helplessly at the cylinder. We need to sell it now, before it wakes up or blows up. I can't let it go. Not yet, Nima replied, turning back to the screen. The blue light washed over her stubborn expression. I need to know more about it. I have to see what's inside. You have a shift at the maintenance bay, he reminded her. I will call in sick today, she said, already typing again, the rhythmic click-clack of keys drowning out his worry. The mayor's scrap robots can go a day without me maintaining their hydraulics. This is more important. Dax knew better than to continue arguing with Nima. The biting, metallic tang of ozone hung heavy in the cramped workshop, mixing with the pervasive smell of rust that coated every surface on Ironspine. But Nima didn't seem to notice the stifling atmosphere at all. She was hunched over the workbench, her copper braids swinging slightly as she adjusted the magnification on her goggles, completely lost in the circuitry of the device they had scavenged. Dax leaned back against a stack of crates, feeling the rough, peeling paint against his leather jacket. The biting pain of cashing in his prize immediately was sinking in, a heavy stone in his gut. A cylinder like this, sleek, uncorroded, humming with a faint, impossible energy, could have bought them water filters for a year, or perhaps a functional atmospheric scrub for the bunker. But looking at the intense, feverish calculation in Nima's pale eyes, he knew she would not be holding out if there was not more to what he had found. The way she handled the object, with a reverence usually reserved for water or unirradiated food, told him this wasn't just scrap. "Is there anything I can do to help, or am I just breathing up the good air in here?" he asked, trying to keep the restlessness out of his voice. He whistled a low, sharp fragment of a desert tune, the sound dying quickly in the cluttered room. Nima didn't blink. She was so engrossed in what she was studying, her grease-stained fingers hovering over a holographic display that flickered with ancient code, that the world outside her mind had ceased to exist. It was nearly 10 seconds later when the words finally filtered through her processing. She didn't look up, instead whispering something softly to the machine in front of her, coaxing it before addressing him. "I have run the simulations 3 times, she murmured, her voice distracted. "I think we need an empty, completely erased droid shell. We need a factory reset android to upload this software into, something with a neural capacity far beyond the junker bots we use for lifting crates." Dax frowned, pushing his goggles up onto his forehead, wiping a smudge of red dust from his brow. He grunted, stopping to scratch his head where the welding burns itched under his hair. "And just how exactly do we do that? We live on a dead, abandoned planet. Finding a pristine shell in the rust deserts is like finding a snowstorm in a volcano." Nima finally turned on her stool, the hydraulics hissing. Her expression was serious, terrified, and exhilarated all at once. "The last lantern," she said, the name of the settlement dropping into the room like a physical weight. "In the center of their city, right near the dying geothermal vent, is a battle droid that they use as a statue, a monument to the end of the corporate wars." She took a breath, her hands trembling slightly. It is decommissioned, stripped of weapons, and I guarantee that its memory banks and its protocol have been completely wiped to prevent accidental activation. Dax felt the blood drain from his face, leaving him cold despite the heat of the workshop. "You have gone completely mad," he whispered, staring at her as if she were speaking a dead language. "You want to upload an unknown, potentially rampant program into a totally dormant, military-grade battle droid, and what? Just hope it is friendly? Hope it doesn't decide humans are just another form of soft ore to be processed?" "Yes," Nima replied, her voice shaky but defiant. She traced a finger over the smooth metal of the cylinder. "We have all heard the legends, Dax, that the first harvesters were here to harvest the resources at a sustainable rate, that Ironspine was meant to be a colony, not a carcass." She looked up, her eyes wide. It was the corporate greed that changed everything. The mandates shifted to total extraction. I believe this code dates before that shift, before the Aegis Corporation stripped the soul out of the machine network. This code, it predates the first harvesters starting to consume the planet. It might be the only thing left that remembers how to build rather than destroy. Don't forget to like and subscribe. This is the first 2 chapters of a novel that is a work in progress. Please feel free to comment below.